Planning Partnership Conference. This conference has been for a while now, a longstanding tradition where ag worker advocates across Nebraska have been able to come together to network and learn from each other about the critical roles we all play in protecting and lifting up some of our most vulnerable workers. This year's on the local expertise of those who serve Nebraska's agricultural workers. And much like the ag workers we serve are often subject matter experts in their respective fields, pun fully intended there, we too in these ag worker advocacy space have some exceptionally talented and dedicated people that deserve recognition. And so over the course of the next few days, we're going to learn a thing or two from these experts that are in our own backyard. This year's programming was made entirely possible by an absolute wonderful planning committee. This group of individuals are all very, very smart, but nonetheless, they made the very, very poor decision of allowing myself and Jody Stutzman to co-chair the planning of this year's conference. So if anything goes wrong over the next couple of days, I want you all to know I take 100% responsibility. You can send all benjamin.zink. No, I'm kidding. Don't. That's not my email. Don't message Ben. But in all honesty, I do want to take just a minute to introduce and thank our planning committee this year. Of course, like I mentioned, Jody Stutzman from Proteus. Thank you to Jody for co-chairing the planning committee this year. Jody is one of those people that you talk to about her schedule and you realize you might be busy, but you're probably never going to be Jody Stutzman busy. She is constantly running around, quite literally. I think she runs like ultra marathons, like 1,000,000 miles. And so in any case, thank you to Jody. Also on the planning committee is Janelle Sentha from Legal Aid of Nebraska. Janelle is my paralegal and our programs outreach coordinator. You're going to hear from Janelle later today in the conference. And but I did want to thank her for serving on the planning. Her choice since I volunteered her, but your service was greatly appreciated nonetheless. Also on the committee, Aaron Moreno, our state monitor advocate. Despite what you've heard about Aaron, he is actually a very cool guy. No, I'm kidding. Aaron is actually represents, I think, one of those things that's very special about Nebraska, in that our MSFW community in this state works really well together. And a large part of that is because of people like Aaron. So thank you, Aaron, for your help. To fill this year. Fun fact about Benjamin real quickly is he is actually the world's best dad. And I think he has a mug to prove it, if I recall correctly. I learned last year and I had to tell my kids that I was no longer number one. So thank you, Benjamin, for all the help on the planning committee. We also had Ita Mendoza from Title 1C. She jumped in a little late, but we were happy to have her. I don't believe we're going to hear from Ita this time around, but for those of you who work with Ita, you know that she is a very dedicated person. Just a couple of weeks ago, I think she emailed me at like 1 or 2 in the morning to let me know she wasn't going to be at our planning meeting, the 6 or 7 hours from then. So that type of dedication is what makes Ita so effective at what she does. So thank you, Ita, for jumping in. Of course, we have Dr. Athena Ramos from UNMC. Athena, thank you for helping make this year's conference a reality. I know many of you already know Athena, and so you probably Nebraska that you can mention in a boardroom or on a feedlot, and the people have equal chances of knowing who she is. She's everywhere, and she's highly regarded and an accomplished scholar in the field of agricultural health. She has written volumes of literature and has spoken at places across the country about her research, and yet she carves out a little bit of time to talk with us knuckleheads once in a while. So thank you, Athena. And lastly, but most importantly, I would say, is Karen Schmidt. Karen from UNMC. She's the only reason any of us are here today, and I'm not even kidding about that. Karen single-handedly has been handling the registration and putting on, doing everything behind the scenes and making everything go. So Karen, thank you for making this conference a reality. Okay, so you found, because you're all here, is your one-stop shop for the conference today. If you have to log off and jump back on, you can use this exact same Zoom link. We will be here all day. Microphones. If you can, please remember to mute yourself. We're going to have different presentations and different presenters, and so there may be some interaction or there may be time for questions. That'll be up to each individual presenter, so please be respectful and remember our Zoom etiquette today. Same thing with cameras. If you'd like to keep your camera on, feel free to, but like the microphones, let's be respectful and not a distraction to the group. Breaks, we do have a number of breaks scheduled throughout the presentation. You'll see on the schedule, we should have plenty of time to get up and stretch. Just Google it. That's my best, advice, or talk to your IT department. If neither of those work, you can reach out to myself or Karen, and we will try to help you with any technical issues we have. So I think that's all I have for housekeeping, and I think we're ready to go ahead and transition into our very first session of the conference. Unfortunately for all of you, you're going to have to hear me gab for just a little bit longer. Our first section is actually a kickoff panel discussion, which I'll be moderating, and I'm going to be joined by some wonderful folks here, and hopefully they're all on. We'll find out here in a moment. Yeah, look, we're already ahead of schedule, so we're doing all right. All right, so like I mentioned, the first session that we're going to have today is a kickoff panel. We hope that today's discussion into why it is that we're even here, and what these wonderful people on the panel and why they do what they're doing. So without further ado, I want to welcome our panelists. We're going to have this morning, we're going to have a Dr. Athena Ramos from UNMC. We're going to have Lori Marquez from the Nebraska Department of Labor. Yep, Lori's here. And we're going to have Jody Stutzman from Proteus and Ita Mendoza from Title I-C. So I think I saw everyone here, so we are good to go. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to, instead of me doing longer introductions, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves, where they are from in terms of favorite fruit. I think that's a good question to start with today. So Athena, if you could start us off.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Athena Ramos. As you heard, I'm an associate professor at the College of Public Health at UNMC in Omaha. I'm originally born and raised here in Nebraska. I grew up in Bellevue. My parents were in the military, and so here we are, a Puerto Rican German, daughter of a Puerto Rican and a German immigrant here in Nebraska. I would have to say my favorite fruit is strawberry, although I recognize that there's a lot of problems with strawberry production. And so I know some of my students are here on the call as well. We recently read a book about the devil's fruit, which is referring to the strawberry industry in California. So I recognize a lot of problems with it, but it sure tastes good. Thank you, everyone.
I can go next. My name's Ita Mendoza, and I work for the Migrant Education Program, and I am the Identification and Recruitment Coordinator for the state. And my favorite fruit is mango. Well, depends on the season, but mangoes are always good.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lori Marquez. I'm employed with the Nebraska Department of Labor. I'm located here in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and I serve the Panhandle of Nebraska. I am a reemployment coordinator, so I hold multiple roles. I'm a business service representative, assisting area businesses with their employment and hiring needs, and also serve as the migrant seasonal farm worker outreach coordinator. So I provide outreach services to our area farm laborers. My favorite fruit, I would say it was really hard, but I'd have to say probably between peaches and mango. Same thing, Ita. Both are pretty good. So.
Good morning. My name is Jody Stutzman, and I work at Proteus. I'm a regional director based in Hastings. I felt like this favorite fruit was a trick question because I'm not for sure if an avocado is one of those things that's a fruit or a vegetable, but it's my favorite because it's a good fat. And so you can't go wrong with something that's healthy and a good fat.
All right. And is that everybody?
Okay, so my name is Rishad Ahmed. I'm a second-year PhD student at the College of Public Health.
Rishad, I'm gonna interrupt you there. I'm sorry. We're just introducing the panelists. We might be
sorry.
No. Thank you. Yeah, definitely drop it in the chat. Yeah, drop your contact in the chat, and you guys can have at it in the chat. But thank you, Rishad. We might be here all day. We don't have enough time for all of that introductions for everybody. But and so. My internet connection is already starting to be spotty. So Janelis, you're on deck in case I jump off again. In any case, I do think we have the panelists all introduced. We heard some great fruits. I'm gonna disagree with you, Jody. I don't think an avocado is a fruit. I don't know the technical term, but it's just one of those things. I just don't think it is. Let's get into some of the discussion questions. Before we get into that, I do want to make a quick note here. If anybody has questions for the panelists, for us today, go ahead and drop it in the chat. Janelis is actually going to be monitoring the chat and be holding those questions. We're going to go through a couple questions, and then we're going to take a break to answer some of those questions. So go ahead and drop them on there. Janelis, we'll get to them here pretty shortly. We're going to have a couple breaks to get through some questions, all right? So with that being said, to the panelists, all of you work with agriculture workers at some level, and some of you more exclusively than others. But can you tell us how each of you ended up in the ag worker advocacy space? And again, I'm going to start with Athena, if that's all right.
Sure, I'm happy to be first. If you ever saw me in class, I would be always the kid in the front row of the classroom. So I'm good with going first. I kind of got into this space a little bit by accident and a little bit by design. And so I used to have a friend, and probably many of you know him, Ricardo Ariza. He used to work at Creighton University, and Ricardo used to put together a migrant journey service learning program. And every year he would take Creighton students over spring break to go visit migrant farm worker camps and live alongside and be alongside migrant farm workers. And he would do that all over the country. And so I'd always hear some really great stories about incredible experiences that he would have with his students. And that sparked my interest. He also hosted the National Catholic Migrant Farm Worker Network Conference in Omaha 15 years ago, maybe. Probably some of you around the room remember. And I got to go to that conference, and I was actually part of a theater troupe at the time, and we were doing a show about the stories of migration, stories of immigration that we had either experienced ourselves, or we had people that we knew in the community, friends, family members, and so forth, that we actually wrote their stories and got a chance to perform those stories at this Catholic Migrant Farm Worker Network conference. It was one of the most powerful experiences as a community actress, I could say. At the end of the show, all of the workers who were there, they grabbed hands, and they grabbed our hands and made a huge circle around the room and started to sing. about the power that we all had if we worked together. And that was a transformational experience for me. But my actual work started in 2012 when I took an agricultural health and safety class at UNMC, which is something we still continue to offer every year, and it is free. So if anybody's interested, let me know. And I will get you information about the class. But what I realized is that there was a lot of research and there was a lot of work going on in the Midwest, but mainly with farmers, not farm workers. And they make a big, big differentiation in the research world between farmers and farm workers. And so I realized that there was a big opportunity for me and for my team to really expand in that area here within the Midwest, because nobody was doing any real work, research work with farm workers. And so that's how we actually got into the space. We had been doing work with Hispanic Latino communities all across the state on lots of different health issues, but that was our entree into the farm worker advocacy space. And from there, we've done a number of pilot studies. We've done work with feed yards, with hog confinement, with dairy workers, migrant and seasonal farm workers. And so we've got a lot of different experiences now that I think contribute to our ability to be effective advocates in this space. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Athena. And that's you pointed out something that's really important, I think, for all of us to understand here in Nebraska is, by and large, and there's a lot of attention and resources on the farmers, not always on the farm workers, right? So yeah, so any other panelists, you want to tell us how you ended up in your current role?
Can go next. The state of Nebraska, under the Department of Labor, we have an obligation to provide services to our migrant seasonal farm laborers. And so through that is we do outreach and provide services to them. And so, of course, in order to conduct outreach, they look at a few things. The two areas that I was kind of told, because I was kind of told that I would be the perfect fit for our area, would be someone who speaks the most common language in the area. So in addition to English, so that would be Spanish, and of course I am bilingual. And the second would be someone who had experience with migrant seasonal farm labor, which I do have as well. My mother was a migrant seasonal farm worker and traveled to different states with her family to conduct this type of work. And then finally ended up in Torrington, Wyoming, where she met my dad. And then, of course, her family continued to work. But so I do have that experience, and even after after she had us kids, continued to do that type of work during the summer, working the fields, and then also working with the potato, during the other season. So she was, like I said, that was something that was pretty well known to us. As a child, remember going out to the fields with her and playing with the other kids while they did the work. And then, of course, as we grew, also then participated in the labor as well. And so I think it's an area that's very near and dear to me, to be able to ensure that our area farm laborers are receiving the services that are available, that they should be aware of, and sometimes are not, because the work that they do does not allow them to maybe connect with the area services. They're here temporarily, or they're focused on getting the work done, and that's kind of their focus, because that's their way of maintaining and sustaining their families. And so for me, as the years have gone by, I think my heart is in there. It continues to grow to be able to support these individuals and ensure that they are treated fairly, and that they do receive the services and the support from our communities.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. I think we got time for one more. So Ita, can you tell us how you ended up in the ag worker advocacy space?
Sure. I came through a different field actually. I was in the education field prior to this position, and Head Start contacted me, and I kind of ran like an after-school program for migrant students. So that was a contact through there. Also, many of my students got well, not many, but some of my students got recruited for the program, and so that's when I got to know the wonderful recruiter for our area. She would come and visit, not only just to recruit, but she would also get her face was in the area, so that getting to know Aida also helped me get to know the program a little bit better. And once this position opened, I applied for it, and I was very intrigued into learning more about the program. Unfortunately, I don't have the opportunity to much of time to work one-on-one with families. However, I'm there for the recruiters that do a wonderful job at identifying the families and passing them on till the families get served through our program. So that's basically how I got into this position, where mainly we identify workers and recruit them so they can get serviced.
All right, well, good. For our next question, I want to talk a little bit about the reason why it's important for having ag worker advocacy. Throughout history, ag workers have been forgotten, I think, purposefully or sometimes purposely left out of labor rights discussions. And even today, agricultural workers are excluded from a lot of legal protections afforded to workers in other industries. In your line of work, what do you see is the biggest hole in either legal protections or some sort of systematic supports that ag workers would most benefit from? And I'm gonna go ahead and start with Lori on this one.
Yeah, so of course you gave me the most difficult question because it does fall under labor law, and that is kind of not my area of specialty. But there are some laws when it comes to migrant seasonal farm workers. There is the Migrant Seasonal Agriculture Protection Act, which is really that is administered through the Wage and Hour Division. It does kind of safeguard some migrant seasonal agriculture workers, and that's with their interactions with farm labor contractors. And so that I think that's where I feel that maybe that's where the problem lies, that some of those farm labor contractors or farmers are exempt from that. And so that's where you will see maybe some of those protections not being put into place that others may receive. I think probably just in the line of work that I have done, farm laborers are not necessarily paid an hourly wage. So they're not receiving minimum wage like you and I and everyone else out there. And so that can, I think, become a problem because it's based on production, whether that's by row, by bushel, but whatever it is that they are producing or manufacturing, moving, it's by an per item or per number. And so sometimes when you look at that and you even that out, it may not meet that minimum wage. The other piece I think that has been that I've seen quite a bit is not being paid and no way to really enforce that farmer to follow through and pay the individual for those wages. Unemployment insurance is another, those that are and their employment, they're unable to file for unemployment insurance. And so really they're just move on to the next work or next contract because they're unable to file for those unless again, they fall under that that selection there with the registered contractors there for migrant seasonal labor. So probably those are the areas that I am seeing most difficult for those that we see and we hear complaints about in our field. So I would say those are two. Does that answer your question, Danny?
Yeah, I think you pointed out a lot of different areas that there's just kind of some gaps in. I think one of the things that people don't think about when they're talking about ag workers or farm workers or people that work with cattle or whatever, they're usually very invested in their job. So sometimes they're at their jobs for years, and it can be sometimes years until they realize that their employer maybe hasn't been keeping track of their hours well, hasn't been giving them, I've heard a lot of people that they get injured and their employer doesn't report it. And a lot of that, I think, just has to do with how invested they themselves are in the work. It's very easy to forget that. So yeah, thank you, Lori. Along those lines, kind of maybe going away from the legal side of protections, do any of the panelists, do you guys see any sort of systematic things that you think ag workers would most benefit from, like supports or whatever?
This is Judy from Proteus. I know I'm kind of answering a question for later on, but I think with community supports, it's really important to get community buy-in. All of us cannot be there to know every situation that's going on with farm workers just because of the late hours that they work. And so we need to rely on community supports like the Community Action, Salvation Armies to also be aware when farm workers are coming in for services, and with the discussions that might happen so that they're aware of some of the challenges and can also report that to the state monitor, advocate, and legal aid. I know we've been doing a lot of work in the Hastings area to get partners to know more about farm workers. So I think that's really important. And just basic know your rights campaigns. I know with the new administration, public charge is no longer a challenge. But it is a challenge because people are unsure whether or not they should come forward and let people know about what's affecting them in the workplace. And so then they might not even say anything or want to say anything for fear of what can happen, either based on their immigration status, work authorization, and what they want to accomplish going forward.
I think, Danny, to add to what Jody said, that brings a very big point. In farm labor, many of those folks are undocumented. And so they're really kind of, they don't even really have the rights, that a U.S. citizen or someone who's legally able to work here as well. So it puts another additional, I think, gap there because that fear is, like Jody said, there's a fear there. And so I think many times they are taken advantage of, they're mistreated, a number of issues that go beyond, even further away from, in general, I think sometimes farm laborers who are able to work here in the United States are, sometimes at times taken advantage of, exploited, but, that takes it a step further because there's really no one there to protect them. And they just fear that if repercussions if they were to speak up. So that Jody touched on a really good point there.
I think even us in the ag worker advocacy space don't sometimes understand the variety of folks that are in the state. You mentioned people that are kind of here with maybe they're undocumented, maybe they're here on an H-2A visa, maybe they're here on a TN visa. There's all sorts of people that are going to come in. Even just last year, we found out for the first time that Nebraska has sheep herders. We have sheep herders from Peru that are in the state taking care of sheep in this very, very kind of niche employment. And yeah, I think it's kind of going back to Jody's point about educating even within ourselves. And obviously the reason we have these conferences is to, just kind of make people aware of some of these things they might run across. So let's keep moving along here. We'll take a break here for questions. Janice, do we have any questions from the audience?
Ben just asked, is sheep herding a qualifying activity for MEP?
Any of the panelists wanted to
and that was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but that's good to know, right? Who knew we need to figure that out? Certain types of fishing is, and that's not something that happens in Nebraska, but I just popped into my head. Oh my goodness, right?
Yeah, that is exactly right. I mean, and a quick note for those sheep herders, most of the time what you're going to see is those folks coming in on an H-2A visa. And what makes sheep herding kind of its unique thing is there are actually some specific rules that apply to sheep herders that don't apply to regular H-2A workers. And that goes down all the way down to their wages. They can be paid an entirely different way versus, instead of using the AWR or using an hourly rate, they can actually be paid a salaried amount. So it's that the sheep herding thing is an interesting topic.
Yeah, and I think that happens just in general, not just with that, but many individuals are paid a salaried wage. And so the problem also, I think, lies in that they are working an extended number of hours, especially during, harvest. It just, it all across the board you see, and that's just kind of in most people are kind of used to that. They're like, we're paid this much. And a lot of farmers also want to kind of throw in the idea that, but we include housing, but we include, they are very long hours that those individuals are working. And so when you do the math, it may not necessarily quite even out to that federal minimum wage or even the state minimum wage.
And there are also jobs that are very, very remote. So there isn't easy access to a grocery store or other types of facilities that you would normally find if workers were nearby a community.
I want to point out the importance of like this network that we're having in here right now, because what I have not seen, like Benjamin asked, is this a qualifying activity for us? It probably would be. However, I have not seen, we haven't had a student with that qualifying activity. So I think it's important that we collaborate with each other and reach out to each other's agencies, because maybe we have a lot of remote, like Athena said, we have a lot of our recruiters go into like very remote areas where you would need a heavy truck or something to get through, especially during the winter time. But that might be something that one of our agencies may have not found yet. And so collaboration is really important.
The other thing to know is that each agency has their own definition of what they consider farm labor, or, whether they include, working with animals, or it's just simply, the fruits and vegetables, that type of product. So I think it just depends on every individual organization and what their grants or their requirements are. And so you'll find that a little bit different across the board.
Yeah, and again, that's why it's super important to keep connected. Drop your email in the chat so people can ask you questions offline. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next question. You guys are slacking on the questions out in the audience, so we only had the one from Benjamin, nonetheless. So you guys feel free to drop your question in the chat again. Denise is going to be monitoring that. Going on to our next question, what are some of the misconceptions or preconceived notions about ag workers that you want to debunk the most? And we'll go ahead and start with Athena.
Well, I think we've talked about one of the major ones, and I think that there is a huge misconception in the public about how agriculture is just another industry. Because ag is it is the only very special industry that plays by its own rules. In all senses of that phrase, right? And so if they play by different rules regarding overtime, minimum wage, child labor protections, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance. I mean, pretty much you name it, they play by different rules. They also have very limited regulations and oversight regarding health and safety. So looking at, what OSHA would typically look at in other industries, they don't have those same types of oversight responsibilities that they would for other places. And, so I think those are really important distinctions, and that makes agriculture something that we all need to focus more attention on. And I think highlight to the public that there are very different rules. And so what you think maybe a protection for workers, probably doesn't exist for farm workers. I think another major myth out there is that agriculture isn't dangerous, that, you know, it's just kind of like a family activity and everybody goes about it and they do it, you know, their own way, that they've been doing it for generations and everything is, you know, happy and it's the family farm. And that also is not the case. We know that there's been a lot more consolidation and vertical integration within the agricultural industry. And so farms are, the number of farms is getting smaller, but yet the size of farms is getting bigger. So there is much more larger corporate owned types, or what seem like corporately owned types of farm and ag opportunities that are out there. And so I highlight this because ag is dangerous, right? There's a lot of ways that you can die. So I put the link to the flyer for the summer course in the chat. And I tell you what, one of the things that I realized when I took this class is I never knew how many ways that you could die or get hurt working in agriculture before I took this class. I mean, there's so many things, whether it be from chemicals, pesticides, machinery, heat, cold, you know, just overwork, fatigue. I mean, all kinds of things, grain dust, animal handling, you name it. There's a lot to be said there. And I think we need to spend more time and more efforts educating workers about the dangers, because I don't think that even a lot of workers recognize so many of the dangers that they're exposed to on a daily basis. So those would be two that I would highlight for you, Danny.
All right, anybody else?
I can add on to what Athena said. What has shaped my time in agricultural work, I've been in it for 11 years, was in 2018 when Cruz Beltrain died while detasseling corn in Grand Island due to the heat. And I'll never forget this when a local TV news source did a story, and the comments, they posted on Facebook, the comments were, you know, I wouldn't want my children detasseling corn with those men. And so while I value everyone on this call and our partnerships and working together, I also value the work that every single farm worker has done and everyone that I have met. And I just want everyone to know what hard work they do. They care more about their jobs than most people and doing it well. And so I know that's kind of a big thing, but if I could change that, that's what I would change.
I have something that I have also observed within talking within the educational system. Sometimes it's easy to have schools sometimes think that children or the families don't care about their children because they're moving so much. They don't care about their education. And it's just a value system, I think. They care more about eating, taking care of their, you know, finding, it's not that they don't care. It's just, that's a very huge misconception in the educational field. Along the ways, we've had, sometimes we've had instances when schools don't want to admit school students into their school district because they know they're going to move within a month, or within 2-3 months they're going to be gone. And so it's a battle that with this misconception that we're trying to fight, because parents do care about their children. They want them in schools. They want them to graduate. And in fact, that's the reason why they're working.
Yeah, and Ita, to your point a little bit, the one misconception that I have is a little bit along those lines about the education and values that some of these agricultural workers, the migrant workers, the seasonal farm workers that we see in Nebraska have. You know, I think education is for a lot of those families very, very important. And even within the ag workers themselves that we serve, I think that's the other big misconception that I would want to debunk, is that we tend to look down on farm workers as uneducated, and that simply is not the case. We serve so many people that are highly educated, sometimes not in this, you know, this country, sometimes in from wherever they're from. but extremely sharp, extremely smart people that are in agriculture. And we need them, because if we don't have smart people in agriculture, we're not going to be efficient, and we're not going to be able to feed the populace, right? So that for me is one of the things that tends to irk me, is just people looking down on the profession itself. Lori, go ahead.
Danny, I want to add, I think the misconception that many of our farm laborers are immigrants and coming from other countries. While we do have H-2A workers who are come to the States to perform work for a temporary period of time, we have farm laborers in our communities all over, and they may be our next door neighbors. They're not necessarily, most people can also think, oh, they're of Hispanic or Latino descent, but again, you have Native American, Asian, I mean, from all different ethnicities and backgrounds that are coming to work to different states. So yeah, that's another misconception. I think a lot of times that they just, or that they do not have legal status here. And so I think that is something that is also a misconception amongst our communities.
You know,
I got one more for you, Danny. I think a lot of people also think that farm workers are taking jobs from people who live here in the United States. And I think all of us around the table know the reality that many of these farm employers can't fill the jobs that they have. And so they rely on these guest worker visa programs to fill in the gaps. These are stopgap measures because there isn't enough people here who want these jobs. So the reality is they're not taking jobs from anybody.
Yeah, and to those of you, because I did see, Joseph, I saw that you asked a question about H-2A. We'll get to that question here in a second at our next break point. But the reason we talk about H-2A workers so much is because there is a lot in Nebraska. Nebraska during the heavy season gets a lot of different H-2A workers. And back to Lori's point, we see, we think of, at least in Nebraska, we think of ag workers as from a specific, maybe Latin American country in that region. The reality is that is changing. Just in the last few years that we've seen a fairly large spike in other countries being represented in the H-2A program. For the one that we've been seeing quite a big jump is South Africans. We are seeing people that you wouldn't necessarily know are not from Nebraska because they look very much like Nebraskans. And most of them actually do speak English, with a heavy accent sometimes, but because they do speak a number of different languages from South Africa. But just the misconception of what ag workers look like is changing. So move on to our next question here. When I started my legal career at Legal Aid, I was actually not in the ag worker program. I was actually in a domestic violence program. And so I served almost exclusively those people that had been victims of abuse. And with that, I learned that there was some very unique hurdles to the group of people that I was serving. For instance, in the DV world, when you're serving those types of people, you often had things like phone issues, because if they were escaping some sort of abusive relationship, the other partner was maybe paying for their phone. So all of a sudden they had to figure out how they were going to get a new phone. Some of them had scheduling issues. So when I would try to schedule meetings or we would try to schedule court hearings, it was sometimes difficult because they were adjusting to a new life with new work schedules or whatever. And so there's very specific problems or issues when dealing with that population. So transitioning that to the ag worker space, what would you say are some of the biggest hurdles in serving ag workers? And we'll start with Jody on this one.
I alluded to this a little bit ago, but by nature, agricultural work is rural. And so farm workers' access to services, it can be very hard for a number of reasons. First, being rural, you don't really have access to go to cities to get benefits. It's also challenging, at least with our program, when someone needs to be considered low income or receiving public assistance. We've met so many farm workers that do not have Medicaid, SNAP, or other types of benefits just because they might either be too proud to apply or fear of public charge. Another thing that I alluded to earlier was the community buy-in and just making sure that people know why someone is coming in for resources and why they need help. When you have words like migrant splashed all over the news in various contexts, it can be very challenging to explain that this person is a migrant farm worker and gets expedited SNAP benefits. I found that some people, even within that agency, don't realize they get expedited benefits. So that can be a real challenge.
Thank you, Jody. Anybody else?
I think, as Jody mentioned, most of the work is very rural. Nebraska has a lot of large spaces. And I mean, to get from one town to the next, there's a lot of miles in between. So sometimes it's having the resources, and that includes staff, to get to all of those rural areas, and find these farms, and then of course be able to obtain permission to come in and speak to the workers. Not all of the farmers are open to that, and then also, it is, they're not done at 5 o'clock. It's not a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and they get an hour lunch. And so you can, and breaks, and you can pop in and speak to them on their break or lunch hour. It doesn't work that way. Many times they're working and eating along the way, and so it falls outside of our hours as well. So we have to be very flexible. But at the same time, it's hard to be out there alone sometimes, in very rural areas that you may not know where you're at sometimes.
Yeah, the issue of flexibility, knowing that ag workers obviously are working during the day, so they're not going to want to talk to you when they're working, and the issue of safety are some things that we're constantly talking about within our program as well. Anybody else having examples of specific hurdles or unique things that we face when we're serving ag workers?
Well, for migrant, it's all of the above. And I would also like to add that we have to rely, because we are an educational program and there are certain restrictions that we have to assist other families. Many of times we have to rely on other programs like yours, and build that connection, that bridge with your program in order to be able to help or serve the needs of the families, or the needs that we have found within our program. So I like, seriously, I can't thank you enough for like the relationship that you all have individually with each of our 14 programs throughout the state, because I know that whether it be a recruiter or a service provider, somebody has reached out to you for that assistance that it's a hurdle for us, because it can't come out of our budget due to our restrictions. But I am so thankful that we have those working relationships with other programs. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you guys. You guys make our job a lot easier, because none of our programs are all encompassing. And so it's so important to have those people that we can reach out to try to serve as many needs of our clients as we can. We'll take a break here for questions. Generally, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, Joseph had asked, how long is a H-2A visa good for? Is it just for a season, or is it a year?
Good question. We don't have an H-2A presentation for this year's slate, but maybe we should do one for next year, because that is something that's we see a lot. I'll take this one real quick. Joseph, the H-2A visa, is a very, very specific time frame when an employer brings in an agricultural worker. And so that time frame is actually delineated in their application, and the worker knows exactly how long they're going to be working for that employer. I see that Dina put in the chat that, you know, it's either 5 or 10 months. It can be up to 12 months is that the H-2A visa can be good for. And then even then a visa can actually be renewed or get a new visa up to 3 years. So it's actually, but you know, there's the potential for someone to technically be on visas for 3 years. After that point, there's a rule that says they have to leave the country for 3 months to be eligible again. But you will see them for a variety of times. I mean, I've seen them as short as a few weeks, like 3 weeks or so. But the important thing to remember with the H-2A visa, it's a very, very specific job. It's tied to the employer and for a very specific time. So,
Danny, I have a question. I have something to say.
Yeah.
They can check on the Department of Labor when they approve it, for how long it would take the visa, when they started and when is the end. Even is the day there. That's what I check.
yeah,
Like
thank
in my
you.
areas, they say, oh, they approve this day and this is the last day.
Yeah, thank you. And just real quick, I don't want to dive too deep into it. But those dates are important because they can frame some of the rights that those people might have. Again, I'm not going to, we could spend a half day just trying to talk about the H-2A program and some of the issues with those. But yeah, those work orders that we call them do have a lot of information. Any other questions, Janice?
No.
Okay. We're kind of running down to our last few minutes here, so we're gonna just end with one more question just to make sure we have a little bit of time to let people ask questions if there's any left over. And I want to talk a little bit about burnout. I'm burned out about talking about burnout, but I think it's something that is worth our time, just a few minutes this morning to talk about, because we serve in a very focused area of advocacy, and I do want to take just a few minutes. You know, anytime you're working with a disenfranchised group, it is a bit of a grind. What would your advice be to advocates who are dealing with burnout, or, you know, sometimes what we call compassion fatigue? We have an expert on this, so I'm going to give it over to Athena to start with.
Yes, I'm happy to take that question. So compassion fatigue is really about the vicarious trauma that we all experience when we're trying to help the people that we serve, the communities, the clients that we serve, the families that we serve. And sometimes when you're constantly experiencing that trauma and walking alongside people who experience that trauma, you too tend to feel that, and it leads to sort of a reduced empathy, a reduced sensitivity, and kind of a feeling of being overwhelmed, which in the long term can lead to burnout, which is when you've lost interest, whether that be in your job or in a specific thing. You're really unmotivated, you're exhausted, you're just tired. Like Danny said, he's tired of, he's burned out of talking about burnout. So those are some of the feelings that can happen. And I think they're especially prevalent in the work that we do with community members, because many of the families and the people that we serve they're experiencing some really difficult, stressful, challenging situations. And I think all of us by nature have that tendency to be more empathetic and to really care. Otherwise we couldn't be in these professions that we are, because you need that to be able to do this kind of work. And so some of the things that we can do to protect ourselves and to help us not feel that way is to really build our support system, to count on one another, to count on our coworkers and our community here within Nebraska. So all of our different agencies, we can talk about these things. I think it's important to have really open, honest conversations about the way that we're feeling. And usually there's people in the room who have either are experiencing that or have experienced that. And so if we just talk about it, and I think making that conversation more normal, normalizing that and decreasing some of the stigma that's associated with these issues and talking about them. I think we all need to practice self-care. We need to set some boundaries. I know I have a difficult time with this of cutting off work because you know that there's so many things that you need to do. There are so many people that you could potentially help, but we do need to draw a line at some point for our own health and well-being between work and our personal lives. And so setting some boundaries, I think, is really important. Finding a hobby, finding something fun that you enjoy doing and that you can do on a regular and consistent basis, I think will also help you. And then thinking about the way we think about things. So reframing the way that we think about different situations. So typically there's kind of two different ways that people think about situations. One is that you hear a situation and boom, you go straight to the answer and you try to find the very active ways to resolve the challenge or the problem. The second way is what we call emotion focused coping. And so you tend to really think about, the emotions that are entangled in that specific situation. You're thinking about all the consequences associated and how that makes you feel, right? I'm not saying one way is right or it's wrong, but what we do know is that sometimes when you're more in that emotion focused coping strategy, that tends to bring a lot more of that compassion fatigue and that burnout. And so sometimes if you can reframe your thinking into active forms of, okay, well, I can do this, but I cannot do that. And being very clear about what is within your wheelhouse, what is within your capacity to do, and then trying to find those partnerships. So you've got now a network of people all across the state. Everybody here wants to work with each other. We're building collaborations. We're planting seeds of partnership. And so calling on one another. So if I know I have a legal question, I'm going to be calling Danny. He knows that. If I have an education issue, I'm calling Benjamin, I'm calling Ita. If I need to find people, I'm calling Aida, right? There's people around the room that we know that can help us. And so if we really just put our money on our friends and kind of spread the love and delegate and ask for help when we need it. So I would say those are a number of different tips, I would say, to help deal with compassion fatigue and burnout.
Yeah, well, thank you, Athena. We have just a couple of minutes left in the hour. So I do want to just leave a quick moment to answer any questions if there are any. Janice, do we have any questions to address?
No, we do not.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time we're going to have for questions. We didn't get to everything, but it's because we all love talking so much and we love seeing each other so much. So it's always good to talk to everyone on this panel. I want to thank each of you for your expertise, for lending us some of your advice this morning. Hope you guys can be thinking about some of the things that we discussed. Obviously, we were just scratching the surface on a lot of these topics that we will hopefully get to know more about throughout the next couple of days. You're going to be hearing from a couple of these folks later in the day or over the next couple of days.